Welcome to Bring Out the Talent, a podcast featuring learning and development experts discussing innovative approaches and industry insights. Tune in to hear our talent help develop yours. Now here are your hosts, TTA's CEO and President Maria Melfa and Talent Manager Jocelyn Allen.
I know our audience is probably sick of us talking about our dance moves because it's like how much more exciting could our dance moves get on this good but not very complicated song, but they really are very different every single time. We've had a lot of fun.
Yes, the guests bring something to the table. We have accessories today that we are using. It really it gets us going for the show. It's our process, right? It's our process getting jazzed up. And I mean, it's a great tune. So
exactly,
it comes naturally.
I think one day we should have an open Zoom meeting and we can invite people to do some dance moves with us and we can have a contest.
I actually love that
idea. Exactly.
Imagine if we set a date and we're like, listen, let's bring out the talent, listeners. The time has come. You got moves. We want to see them.
Exactly. And we'll give away some gift cards. Okay.
We're doing it.
So Jason, you heard this first.
Yeah, bring out all the talent. Bring out all your talents.
I like that.
Please.
Okay. Well, Jocelyn, did you know that employees who are recognized as key influencers within their organization can increase companies' performance by up to 25%? Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but that is a large percentage, and I can see how that would affect an organization.
Yes. So these are the people everyone turns to for the meeting after the meeting. We know that. Sometimes I could see after we have meetings, you see people talking to each other and saying,
those little water cooler
what did Maria say? I had no idea. She was very confusing.
What was that meeting about?
No, what was that meeting? And it's obviously a very important thing. So in this episode of Bring Out the Talent, we welcome Jason Anthoine.
That's right.
I said it right?
You got it closer than most everybody else ever has. So thank you very much for whatever practice you did before.
Anthoine. I said it right.
Yeah,
Anthoine. Okay, good. Okay, great. And we don't even have to delete that part. So with 35 years of experience working alongside CEOs, CHROs, and COOs, Jason has dedicated his career to helping leaders better inform, involve, and inspire their employees. His unique approach is rooted in his own background. Growing up in a blue-collar household in Fort Valley, Georgia, Jason was deeply influenced by his parents. His father was an assembly line foreman and his mother a bank secretary. These early experiences shaped his mission to make work and the people who do it truly matter. Today, Jason will share his invaluable insights on identifying and working with your company's untapped internal influencers, the ones that everybody turns to for help and advice. He'll discuss how these influencers can transform your company culture, boost morale, and drive your organization's goals and initiatives. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that I was able to get a chance to dance this afternoon. That doesn't happen every day.
Well, we're glad to see your dance moves and welcome.
Yeah. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Jason, your story is inspiring on a lot of levels because the story of the background and your passion, why you kind of led yourself in this direction and then created the business that you have, unlocking potential and this idea of internal influencers. The word influencer is huge, right? It is a very hot word in our culture right now for many reasons. We think about it from a social media perspective, but at the end of the day, what you've deduced is that these are go-to people. Who do you rely on for the real goods and information? And I love the idea of instilling that power and confidence in those people to drive other people to do the same thing. So I'm very inspired by this message that you're sending. And it's great to have an episode on it. So I'd love to start with a little bit more about the tail end of that intro there, like the story about your parents and what has inspired you to create this idea of inspiring your employees through the power of that influence.
Yeah. Well, like most people, when you're growing up, your parents are working and they come home and they talk about what happened at work. I think a lot of kids are like, oh, how boring. I don't want to hear anything about this. But for some reason, it was always interesting to me. My dad was working down at it's a school bus factory. So you grew up riding on a Bluebird school bus. He was making those things. So he had a different kind of point of view because he was working on the assembly line at a school bus factory versus my mom, who was working at a bank as a secretary, which I guess was back when you could say secretary. I think executive assistant is probably a little more popular now, but same thing. But it was just great to when they would come home and I could hear stories that they were telling about what was great and what was not great and what was working and what wasn't working and why those things might be. And all that stuff just kind of embedded itself in me. And when I went to school at University of Georgia and got a degree in journalism,
We won't
we won't
comment.
talk about that, Miss
Okay.
Wolverine.
Okay.
You see the look he gave you? I love that. Jason.
That's right.
Like he's slowly with the
Always
side eye. That's
intimidating.
good.
Bulldogs are always intimidating. So when I got my first job right out of college, it was doing an employee newsletter for a bank. I also had to do media relations and press releases, but I really love the employee newsletter side of things. And so that started this 35-year career where I've spent my entire time helping companies inform and involve and inspire their employees. Of course, I've had responsibilities as CCO a couple of times for external comms and different things like that. But my true passion is internal comms and culture and employee experience, because all those things really matter. I mean, think about it. How many hours do we all spend each day, each week, month, year after year at work? It's way more time than we're spending. It ought to be for everybody's good, the company and the employees, plus the customers. So I just, it's almost like I fell backwards into it, and I'm glad I did. And I haven't tried to climb out of that pool over 35 years.
How would you describe an internal influencer? So I know it's probably different than those social media influencers.
Yes.
And what makes them different from the usual formal leader that we see in companies?
Well, you're exactly right, because when you hear the word influencer, you immediately think X or Facebook or other sort of external social media platforms. And all those types of influencers are certainly important for a lot of reasons, especially for companies who use them to help sort of drive their brand awareness. But when we are talking about influencers, we mean the ones on the inside of the organization. And like you said in the intro, these are the ones that everybody goes to for the meeting after the meeting. And what makes them different from normal leaders and managers and others is that typically they are not leaders and managers. They can be, but not always, and certainly not usually. And they usually don't have a title that you would think would be like a leader or a manager title, but they know a lot. They understand a lot. They watch and listen probably a little more than most other folks do. I don't have any research to back this up, but it feels like they're more like empathetic sort of introverts almost, where they are absorbing things before they form opinions. And I think that makes them not just the influencers that they are, but it makes people even more comfortable talking with them and approaching them, because they do approach their work in that manner. And it makes it easier to form relationships with them, knowing that this person is just doing this because it's the best thing for them and for the people they're influencing and the company itself. They're not trying to be promotional or extroverted or anything like that. They just hear and listen to things differently and turn that into something good.
Do you think it's just high emotional intelligence, or are there other qualities?
That's a good question.
Well, that certainly is a great component, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because they typically tend to be people who are a little more curious, who are a little more introspective about things, and so those folks tend to be, on that scale that you just described, because they naturally want to know more, understand more. And over time, they've gotten really good at being able to translate those things so that other people can understand them in the same way. And a lot of times that's not the case. We've all been in town halls and organizations where leaders are talking about this, that, and the other thing. And sometimes it's just like Chinese math, because it's so complicated. They have a way of being able to translate those things into things that people actually understand and appreciate. And so it probably does put them on that scale, Maria.
Little sidebar question too, because I'm absolutely thinking of the types of people that I see every day. Then I'm like, yeah, you are the internal influencer. And I see all of the traits that you're mentioning too, like the awareness and the active listening and the empathy. Are those people, let me think of the way I want to ask this question. I guess in your experience overall, should those people be put in leadership positions based on that? Or should we focus on this influencer idea as their role? Do you know what I'm asking? I know I'm not kind of like articulating it, but
no, you did. That's a great way to put it. And I think the reality is that some leaders are influencers and some influencers are leaders, but the best way to think about them is that's two different things from an employee's perspective. So I might have a leader that I work with and for that I really enjoy, and it's a great relationship. Because I have somebody else that I go to who is my influencer, that is no reflection on my relationship with my leader. It's almost like employees see them as two different people that they can go to that have similar skills, but not the same. So you can be an outstanding leader and not necessarily be listed as an influencer. And we see that all the time when we're working with our clients on that, is that, oh my gosh, so-and-so that leads the West region is not even on this list of internal influencers. How could that? I mean, they're a leader. How can that be true? It is true because employees see the need and the qualities of a leader a little bit differently, and there's room for both of them.
Thank you for that, because I think it's hard to answer that question concretely, but I wonder if, it's kind of like what you said, there's room for both too, which means there's room for overlap as well. So what are these traits exactly, other than what you mentioned? Because I know Maria had asked the question about emotional intelligence, and you had mentioned some of the things that you've experienced, that there's an level of empathy there that you see across the board, and curiosity. What other key traits or behaviors make somebody identifiable as the internal influencer, and how are they standing out from the crowd?
Yeah, they tend to be, like we said, really curious, somewhat introspective. They are keeping a pulse on the organization, but usually like one or two levels down, because they're not trying to be obvious about it. And some of them, nobody sets out and says, I'm going to be an influencer at this organization. They just are who they are. And so sometimes those traits, like we just mentioned, are apparent. Sometimes they become things that they acquire over time. It could be a short amount of time, it could be a long amount of time. But eventually they become the type of person who tends to be a little bit more calm, a little bit more measured, and take some time to form opinions around whatever it is that's going on in the organization, so that when people come and ask them things, they've thought about it rather than sort of quick reactions that you may see in other personalities and other types of folks in the organization. So, and I think the other thing that makes them not only influencers but effective is that they do a really good job at what I call the little C communication. So big C communications is stuff that comes from headquarters and comes from the communications team, but little c is all the other communications that happen in an organization. And so they are really good at little c communications, which to me is helping to translate all the big C stuff that's coming out into real human words that people at different parts and different levels of the organization can understand and appreciate. And that's a unique skill, but they all seem to have that in common. And by the way, all this whole influencer, internal influencer concept and work, my partner on this, there's a firm in Copenhagen. They also have an office here in the U.S. The company's name is Innovisor, with an O, Innovisor, innovisor.com. They pioneered this work several years ago, and they have all kind of stats and data around some of the things that we're discussing on their website. But we've been really strong partners over the last couple of years. And it's just been amazing to see some of the work that they've done in Europe, particularly, and how that translates into a U.S. culture and corporate America. And there's vast differences between those two regions. But it's an incredible concept that I don't know that anybody's really thought about or spent a whole lot of time on. Certainly not how to identify them and what do you do once you do. But they've really pioneered that. And so it's fantastic to work with them because they know about 1,000 times more than I do about it.
That's interesting. I know
Yeah.
Bruce Tolgan, who we've had here for
Yes.
a guest a few times. He has written a book on this topic,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
which is, it's been a good book. Yes.
Yeah, it is a good book and lots of like really valuable insights from the leadership perspective of it too. It's something that's right there in front of us, I think, and it takes somebody to target it and understand what it can do to make business changes and growth. And you talked about this company, say it again,
Innovisor.
Innovisor. Yep. I didn't want to
Innovisor.
say it wrong.
Mhm.
Please
Yeah,
forgive me.
uh-huh.
So this company Innovisor, what do they say about identifying these influencers? Like, do they have a secret sauce recipe on their page? Like, how do we point these people out? And what are the signs or strategies around it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you would think if they're influential that everybody would know who they are, but most people don't. And the interesting thing is that usually it's a certain level of leadership and above, or maybe HR as a whole doesn't know that. But what's interesting is that all the other employees in the organization know who the internal influencers are because they're already going to them. So the best way, you can certainly observe behaviors and what people are doing, but the best way to understand who these internal influencers are is to ask your employees, like, who do you go to for the meeting after the meeting? Who helps you really understand some of these more either complicated or challenging things that we're dealing with here in this organization? Who really helps you do that? And they'll just tell you. And so now you've got a list of the people that employees themselves have identified as being influencers inside the organization. There are a lot of different things you can do with that knowledge, including nothing, which is also a very good thing to do. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But those tend to be how to spot them. Sometimes it's obvious, usually it's not. But the people who know who they are the people who are going to them every single day. So let's ask everybody, who do they go to?
I know we talked about the meeting after the meeting. Do you think that that happens, though, because the leader was not clear in communication? And I'm sure that, I guess I'm going to answer my own question. I'm sure perhaps, but there's also a different component of this.
What else?
You're
Yes.
exactly right. I think sometimes it's because they're not clear. Personally, I don't think it's because they're intentionally not clear. I don't think people, certainly senior
I
leaders,
agree.
I don't think they think that way, but I think they think they're being clear, but they live in a different world than maybe some of the other employees do. And so what's clear to somebody might not be clear to somebody else. So sometimes I think it's because they're not clear. Sometimes it's because they're crystal clear. And in either case, humans being humans, I think employees want to know more. Like when you say we need to increase market share in this region, okay, I understand that. I even understand what I might need to do to make that happen. But why? And just doing corporate communications and executive communications for 35 years now, in a typical town hall, right at the very end, you may have 3 to 5 minutes for, all right, does anybody have any questions? And your fingers are crossed that nobody will have any questions because you're right at the end. But that's where all the why comes out. That's where all the why comes out. And so when people say, oh, that was a great town hall, but I really would like to know more about this, it's because not enough time was spent on the why. And I think when people go to these influencers for this sort of meeting after the meeting or any other type of clarification, it is mostly to discuss the why. Most organizations do a pretty good job of the what and the when and the how and the who and where, but not the why. And it feels like that these influencers are really good at helping people to understand the why.
So I'm curious, Jason, can this ever work against you if you have a toxic culture or you have toxic employees that could be a negative influencer? So you have the cheerleader. Thank God we don't have that at TTA. We have experienced that over the 30 years, though, that has this group. And after a meeting, they like to get together and complain about things. And I know a lot of it's human nature. People do like to talk, but the problem is they could be talking about, can you believe what she or he just said to me? And then that keeps it within that group versus the person then going back to the leader and discussing their concerns about that, because I believe most often it's just a case of misunderstanding and miscommunication when you really get down to it.
You are 100% right. If you think about internal influencers, kind of like a superhero, I mean, superheroes can use their powers for good and for not so good. And so, same is true with influencers. And we've all run into folks like that who are both doing the good stuff and the not so good stuff throughout our careers. And so they can have just as much impact in the wrong direction as they can have impact in the right direction. I don't have data to back this up, but my gut says, based on just observing employee behavior, usually over time, it just gets so tedious talking negatively and listening to negative things all the time to the point where people are like, all right, we've just been talking about this forever. What are we actually going to do about it? And soon as it gets moved into, all right, what is the action that we can take to recommend how to fix this thing? That's usually when the negative folks who are the influencers lose interest, because their main interest is just dusting up negative stuff all the time. So once you come up with a solution for how to solve those things, now they can't sit around and do all the negative stuff. So, but you're right. It can go both ways, and sometimes that's good. You want somebody to constantly be questioning. All right, y'all said this, but why? I don't understand what's going on. Like, poke holes in it. We need people who are going to do that if we're going to get true understanding across the organization. So we want some people to be doing that all the time, whether they're influencers or not. But there is a time when that becomes a little bit too much, and it doesn't help the organization or the people in it.
I agree. It's like, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions, or let's talk it out if you're not sure.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no way to avoid that. We're all working with humans until the robots take over. And even then, somebody's got to boss around the robot. So I don't know that any of that's ever going away. So, let's just accept that that's what it's like to be a human and figure out ways to take advantage of those things.
Exactly. I think when we're all working on the same goals and have the same mission, then it becomes clear that we all just want to talk through these misunderstandings, and that we don't have to worry about this influencer working against the mission.
Right. And you bring up a really good point. If we're all working towards the same goals and mission and KPIs, or however it is we're measuring our success, the best way for people to truly understand those things and then what to do about it is to spend a lot more time on the why. A lot more time on the why. We spend a ton of time on the other things, of course, but for truly people to understand and then make decisions and change what they think, feel, say, and do as a result, it takes the why. Think about your own personal life. Oh, you need to put your seatbelt on. Well, I'm just going to do it because somebody told me. Or why? Why would that even matter if I put my seatbelt on? Well, here's why. Oh, well, yeah, you're right. I will make this decision to do this. It's the why that triggers that change in what they think, feel, say, and do, usually.
That's a great insight. And I think what makes us so passionate about this is that there's so many, we work very closely here at TTA. We work with a lot of customers, helping them, find solutions for these types of issues. And a lot of times what you see are the problems first, right? Before you start to find the solutions. So I can appreciate that. Like, there's a yin to every yang and vice versa. So how do we tip the scales a little bit in the other direction though? So like, we've talked about the potential risks, right? Where there could be the exact opposite of that positive influencer, and therefore a negative influencer. So how do we engage the positive influencers? How do we get them to drive goals and initiatives and get the group of people around them that need to have that person in order to drive their own change and growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the beautiful thing is that is already happening. So all the organizations are like, we need to know the list, and then we need to know what to do with these people. Usually the best thing to do is nothing. We know who they are. We can include them in things that we're already doing to make sure that they can keep doing what they're doing. So, and that usually depends on your culture. So if you're in the type of work culture where knowing who influencers are and leaders being okay that it might not be them, then great. It's perfectly fine to talk openly about that and use them in different ways and make sure that they're included. In other cultures, that's not necessarily true. Doesn't mean one's better or one's worse. It just means they're different. So you may work in a culture where leaders would get nervous if their names aren't on the list, or there might be other reasons why, gosh, we know who these people are, but we don't really know what to do with them. And we're not sure if some of them are all positive all the time or some negative, some of it. Like it just creates a whole other list of things that people want to find out. But usually, I mean, they're already influencers. They're already influencing. Now you just know it. And it's sort of like Fight Club. First rule of Fight Club is not talk about Fight Club. So
Just gonna say that.
same thing here. Like first rule of knowing your influencers is to
Don't talk
not
about 'em.
overuse your influencers, because as soon as you do, they lose their influence. Because once the people that they are influencing perceive that, well, I thought this person was somebody that I could trust and go to, but now because corporate is involving them in everything, feels like they're no longer on my side and they're on their side, and now there might be a spy or I can't trust them. Like soon as you start overtly doing things, they begin to lose their influence. So the best way for them to continue to be influential is to let them continue to be influential. They already are. Just make sure that you're including them whenever you're already doing other things, focus groups, surveys, the senior leaders come into town and you want to know who needs to be in the audience, things like that. Just make sure they're being included in things you're already doing.
Okay. So it's like invite them to the table all the time instead of making them in charge of some sort of employee resource group, right? Because I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, do you give them like ownership of an ERG, right? And be like, here's a little place where you guys can all get together and do what we know you're doing anyway. The meeting after the meeting, we're giving it a title, and everybody's like, oh crap, I don't want that. Right.
That's right. Yeah. Then it loses its power.
Right. All the value that the employees are seeing it for. It's like, even though it's unfortunate, because I think there are a ton of leaders who would see it positively and be like, I want you to keep doing this. So I want to give you all the resources you can. But you're saying to basically do that quietly instead. Yes. Don't give it an official title. Just give it its recognition and give them a seat at the table.
That's right. And once you identify these folks and you have a list, you're going to have to put it in a vault and forget the combination, because everybody's going to want to get their hands on that thing. And who wouldn't? Of course, we want to do everything we can for things to be as successful as they can be. And if this will help, good. Let's try this. It's already helping. They're already doing what they need to do. Now we're aware of that. Let's just make sure they keep doing it. That's usually good enough.
Can you share any example that you have?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Innovisor and I are working right now with a client in the telecom space where we are identifying their internal influencers. We have gotten through that point of this initiative with this client. And now here's the interesting thing. If you think about most organizations of any size, the leaders, quote, leaders, make up about 12% of the employee population. And they can directly influence only about 50% of the rest of the organization. 12% can directly influence 50%, as opposed to internal influencers, which in any size organization, they're typically about 3% of the employee population, but they can directly influence 90% of the rest of the organization. So when we talked earlier about they can use their powers for good, they can use their powers for not good. That's how it shows up. Like everybody's like, oh, we got to get the leaders out there and get them communicating. Yes, you should. But just know you're only going to directly influence about 50% of the organization. If we make sure that influencers are included in the same types of things that the leaders would know that they would know, then we can reach 90%. So there's the additional 40% on top of the 50% that the leaders can reach. And so that just makes everything more effective. So we're at that phase right now with that client where we've identified them. And now we're going one step further where we're taking a representative sample of these folks without necessarily telling them they're influencers and asking them about communications and where they get their information. So if they're influential, how how are they getting information so that they are influential? So from a comms perspective, we want to know where they're getting the information from, what works, what doesn't. And then once they get it, what do they do with it? How do they share it? So we're in that phase right now with that particular client. But those numbers, 3% and 50, and 3% and 90 and 12% and 50, exactly in line with what the averages have been within Advisor over the last 5-10 years.
Some
Absolutely
incredible
fascinating.
stats.
Yeah,
Yep,
it really is.
Certainly is. So what do you think the change is working in a virtual environment? Does that make it harder? Because I know
Yeah.
you don't have the
Yeah.
cooler talk or walking outside the meeting together.
Yeah.
So how do you see the difference on that?
That's a great question. And it's impacted so much of everything, just this whole shift from work from home or from the office or hybrid and then there's a whole group of employees who would never have the opportunity to work from home. You can't build a school bus from your den. That's just how it is. And so for them, it's business as usual as far as where they get their work done. But I think when people want information and need to understand things, they're going to reach out to the people who influence them, no matter where they might be, which before the pandemic was email, maybe walk down the hall, or let's grab lunch or whatever. Now, if we're not necessarily physically together, there's Teams, there's texting, there's all kinds of other digital ways that people are still doing that. And so I think that the lesson there is that it's sort of like water flowing downhill. It's going to go, and nothing's going to stop it. Nothing can get in its way. Same thing here. If people have a relationship with somebody that's important to them, certainly like these influencer relationships are, then they're going to seek them out no matter where they are or what method they have to do it.
So to kind of wrap up here, I want to talk about an interesting stat that we saw that relates to this in our ever evolving love for McKinsey reports. So the stat that they put out, it was based on employee engagement. So I'm wondering how it relates to these influencers and their impact on it. But it says that when companies have a certain amount of engaged employees, that those companies outperform those without engaged employees by 202%. That is insane.
That is eye-popping.
Insane. You take the number that you have, you multiply, you add it to itself, and then you add it to itself again, plus 2%. That's what we're talking about, people. That's insane. So how much of an impact or a contribution do you believe internal influencers have on this number? I think regardless of recognition.
Yeah. I think it's hard to measure because it's hard to measure engagement anyway. People say, all right, we're going to do an engagement survey. People will tell you they're engaged, not because they care about working there, but because I got 3 kids in college and I can't lose this job. So it's hard to measure true engagement, particularly there's not a real common industry definition for what it even is. Regardless, it's an important number and everybody's doing it and they're all doing it in their own way, which is important. And they should be doing that. But I think a lot of what those influencers are doing is basically putting a turbo on whatever the company is already doing to help drive engagement. So if as a company, our bias is towards communicating more and more often, then you're going to drive some engagement there. You're going to drive a little bit more engagement by having that in place and the influencers doing some things themselves on the side where it just feels like a little turbo on top of the engine that you've already got running to help drive better engagement. That is incredibly important because the other thing about influencers is that if they leave an organization for whatever reason, they're not interested or voluntary, involuntary turnover, whatever it might be, the people that they influence are 90% more likely to leave that organization and fairly immediately. Because Maria, if you're going to Jocelyn and say, oh, Jocelyn's my person and she ain't here anymore. And if Jocelyn doesn't think she needs to be here anymore, I don't know why I should be. So when we do this influencer stuff, we end up with like a scattershot map. And then we can look in certain situations where some of those influencers have left the organization for whatever the reason. And then you look at the scatter shop, there's just now big holes where that influencer used to be and where their influencer network also used to be, because now those people are also gone.
What I appreciate the most about that, Jason, is that you have nailed Maria on the nose as the president and CEO of TTA. If I were to leave, she'd be done.
Anybody who's in charge absolutely knows that. The only reason I'm able to be in charge is that somebody's in charge of me. And that
I would be
is
very,
really
very
important.
upset. I wouldn't be done. And I know you're joking, but I would be extremely sad.
Nobody wants to dance alone. Nobody wants to dance alone.
Not.
Okay.
I
So
would
Nobody
not.
wants to.
I mean, you have barely scratched the surface.
No,
I'm
it's
not,
very
I'm
true.
not saying because you haven't done a lot. I'm just saying because we have a lot to go and the sky is the limit, baby.
Beyond. Yes, absolutely.
That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be.
Exactly.
She's like, well, I mean, I'd be sad. I'd buy an extra box of tissues, maybe.
No, I would be very sad.
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
You
And
are
so
an influencer.
And so you can see how in your own organization that would impact engagement, right?
Yes.
Beyond just the structure and operations and all the things that are running through everybody's minds right now. Think about how that would impact engagement across the organization, whether Jocelyn was influencing anybody else or not. So they would be like, oh gosh, then they're questioning things. And so you're going to naturally see a dip in engagement that you hope is a very short V, a lowercase v. Most times it's a very elongated U. And when you're down in that trough, man, you got to do everything you can to get out of there as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love this conversation because I think it is a really important subject that this is untapped resources. Essentially, this is happening everywhere because like it's not just professional. If you think, because we talked about it, there's a social media influencer. There's always that one person in the group of friends that it's like when they don't show up, you're like, what do we do? Right? It's everywhere. So it's kind of taking those things that you know about the personal version understanding of influencers and who could I see doing a makeup tutorial on YouTube and killing it, right? That's your that's your personality in your workforce that can be said influencer. And I think that this is it's a very cool topic for people to give confidence and power to their people, and it accelerates the growth of the organization.
Yeah. And I love that you keep bringing up the external examples because, I mean, think about all those social media channels and platforms. They all exist for influencers and people who want to be influenced. So, for example, you're not sure where to go eat. You're going to go on Yelp and you're going to say, oh, this Chinese place has a really good rating, or it doesn't. So I'm going to make a decision about I'm going to go to this place or not because a total stranger got wonton soup and they didn't like it. So I'm willing to be influenced by somebody or even something that I don't know anything about and they might not know anything about, but I'm still going to let that influence me. Imagine how powerful that is when you do know the person and they do know what they're talking about and you're both together in the same environment. That's 10 times more powerful than what's going on the external side to me.
I agree. Well, this has been super informative, a really fun topic. And I think the only way to go to the next level is to do something else that's really fun. And that's the TTA 10.
Oh, uh-oh.
It's the TTA 10 final questions for our guest.
Another set of awesome tunes. So, Jason, we went over this before the episode. You know what this is all about. So I've got 10 questions I'm going to ask you. You answer them instinctively, and then we will see the outcome, whether or not 90 seconds of completion has been achieved, okay? Or less, as they say. So, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready as I can be.
So is David, because he already started the clock. So, David, can you confirm that 90 seconds are ready, please?
I'm just getting the clock warmed up, Jocelyn, and the TTA 10 begins now.
All right. If you could have dinner with any fictional character, who would it be?
Fictional character, Superman.
Okay. Tell me about a hobby of yours that people might be surprised to know about.
Yard work with a push mower.
Okay. If you could instantly become an expert in any skill, what would it be?
Harmonica.
Okay. What would you say is the funniest thing that happened to you recently?
I don't know how recent it's been, but I went to an arts and crafts fair and I bought a raffle ticket. I didn't know it. I thought I was just making a donation, and I ended up winning a horse. Yes. Got back from the arts and crafts place. The guy called me up. Hey, you won. When should we
Nobody's
bring
going to
you
beat
your
that
horse?
one. You can't use that question again.
What horse? What do you mean, what horse? Yeah, you won the horse. When are we going to bring it to you? I was like, oh, I don't know. I got to do some planning. I'll call you
Oh my
back.
God, that's hilarious. If you could visit any place in the world, where would you go?
Scotland.
Okay.
Oh, yes, my favorite.
If you could learn any language overnight, what would you choose?
Japanese.
Okay. If you could swap lives with anybody, alive or dead, who would it be?
President Theodore Roosevelt.
What's the weirdest food you've ever tried that you surprisingly loved?
Liver. My whole life, I was like, I'm not ever eating liver. And then I had to go on a work trip and I got shamed into not eating liver. So I had the liver. It was actually better than I thought. I'm not going to have it again.
If you were to create a title for a movie about your life, what would it be?
Who the hell does this guy think he is?
Last question. What's 6 + 2?
8.
All right, Jason, that gets us through the 10. David, can you give us the results, please? I mean, giving him a little bit of time for that hilarious
There was
story,
a horse story.
of course,
That's
but
We have to do a conversion for the horse.
We have the horse conversion
I
measure.
didn't even
We
explain. When
named
the
him
word
Clyde.
horse came out of your mouth, I still wasn't ready for
Do you,
it.
do you actually have the horse now?
No, that was when we lived down in Middle Georgia. And
okay.
when we moved, I gifted it to somebody on my team. I was
Okay,
like,
but you
"We're
ended up
moving.
taking
Now
it.
you get Clyde.
He
You
gave
have
it to
Clyde."
his internal influencer. He's like, here.
Adjusting for the horse, Jason comes in at 1 minute and 18 seconds. He is
Boom.
a TTA 10 champion.
Boom, boom, boom.
Champion.
Yes, yes.
Those were
yes.
some deep, provoking thoughts.
They really were. Those were
there,
hard
Jocelyn.
questions.
You didn't give him like easy ones. Those
No,
were
we wanted the
all
good
open-ended
stuff.
more.
But did you
Was-
see the stories
Yeah,
I got out of
very
it?
good,
Yeah.
very good.
Was second prize in the raffle 2 horses? No, just kidding.
It might have been some pigs, which might have been better for some reason. I don't know. But
We
anyway,
do
it
have,
was lovely to own a horse for a while.
of course. So, since you're a winner, Jason, we have hopefully a fitting tribute to you and your heritage, where you came from and where you are now. And let's take a listen.
In a town of peach orchards where dreams are made of steel, a foreman's hands were steady on a line that felt so real. For 37 years he built yellow rides, no fuss, and every day they'd say another one rides the bus. Yes, indeed, Jason, you've got your father's heart, building bridges, making changes right from the start. From the factory floor to the corporate walls, you're such a big deal, you'd impress old Monty Hall. He believed in common sense, in decency and pride, in teamwork and in hard work with nothing left to hide. He taught you to respect, to do what's right and fair, helping others like Batman in his underground lair.
Man.
Incomes and culture change, helping companies and people through every work exchange. From GE to Newell,
Unbelievable.
Siemens to Southwire. Seriously, what the will we do when you retire? With audacity you lead, with passion and with drive. For a better workplace culture, you help the spirit thrive. From inspired to on board, you lead them without drama. It's the audacity of hope, beat your heart out, Obama. In the middle of those orchards, a legacy was born. Now in the corporate world, a new day has dawned. With Henry and Loretta in Atlanta, you will preach. He's the pride of Georgia, Jason, you're a peach.
Thank you. That is.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. That is absolutely incredible. Wow. Wow. I love it. I love it. That is great.
Look at see,
Man.
so now you can be a social media influencer too, because you've
Oh my
got
gosh, I
your
love
own
it.
video to put on your Facebook.
That's fantastic. I
Insta.
can't wait to record that onto, listen, an old cassette so I can play it in my old car as I drive down the road.
Oh, fantastic.
Crank it up and people will be
Just
like, what is that
on
crazy
loop.
guy up to now? I'm like, hey,
Do they have a
I got a
cassette player
theme
on your
song. I
horse?
told you I was somebody. I got my own theme song now.
Do you have a cassette player on your horse?
Not on the horse. Not on the horse. It's just 8-track. It's not cassette.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
He has a
Thanks, man.
Sony Walkman.
What
That's
if you're Jason? I'm just saying, if after this episode you don't get that horse back, everybody's gonna expect you to have a horse after. That was so. Thank you, because the episode was awesome. The TTA 10 was
thank
great.
y'all.
You were like
Yeah.
so authentic and genuine. I loved
Oh.
everything about it. And that horse story, I can't wait to tell everybody about it. Like that was so good.
It really
Oh,
was.
Well, thank
It
you.
was probably one of the best answers we've had, and it was a wonderful episode. Great
Mhm.
information. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you all. It's been such a pleasure. I appreciate you letting me come on here and act a fool. It's been
We
really
appreciate you letting us do the same. So thanks. To unlock your team's hidden potential and recognize the power of your internal influencers, visit us at thetrainingassociates.com. We'll see you later.